Today, as part of our What's That About special interview coverage, we are excited to have on Elizabeth Bisio, a candidate running for Cambridge City Council. Thanks for coming on our show, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much for having me, Pete.
Great. And let's start off just simple. Can you tell me your background and how basically just how you came to live in Cambridge and call it your home?
Yeah, so I moved to Cambridge about 4 years ago because my partner was already living here. I was living in JP. And when we decided to move in together, we decided to move to Cambridge, mostly because that's where our business is. So I was a registered nurse, did the emergency room, but left the bedside about 10 years ago. And I've been working in health tech startups, mostly in Kendall Square. So it just made more sense to be kind of closer to work. And we were planning on building our most recent business in Cambridge. So it helped kind of being on the ground in the city.
Great. And what's your favorite part of living in Cambridge? Do you have any favorite neighborhoods or places to visit or stuff like that?
Yeah, so I really love Inman. I feel like it's the underrated square. We really love going to Punjabi Darba and Oak Bistro, and all the cute little shops there. I sometimes go to the Fit Lab Pilates too. And I think Harvard Square is really fun as well, just with kind of all the students and again, cute little shops. And yeah, so I'd say those are my two favorite. And I think what I love about Cambridge is how each kind of square has their own flavor and is really unique. So it's really diverse across the city depending on where you're at. So you get kind of a big city feel, but still that small town or smaller city atmosphere.
Mhm. How long were you in JP before, just out of curiosity?
Um, I was only there for a year. So I moved there during COVID.
Mhm.
I was living in the South End, but I'm originally from the South Shore.
Okay. Yeah.
So kind of
Yeah, tough
hopped
time
around
to
after.
tough time to move.
Oh, it was yeah, the South End. A lot of people actually moved from the South End to JP during COVID, being like, we need a little bit more space.
Yeah.
Um, but I guess my South End apartment was really fun. I lived right on Mass Ave in Tremont.
So cool. Okay, so tell us why you're running for council. Are there specific issues that you'd like to focus on if you get on the council?
Yeah, so I'm running because I really think that Cambridge deserves better in kind of the way that the council has been functioning as of late, and that I feel like they've gotten really disconnected from residents and are more being driven by special interest groups, and so have lost a lot of trust with residents. So I'm hoping to be able to bring that back through kind of more accountability, better communication of city kind of plans and more focus on outcomes. So that's really the basis of my platform. And I think that just from talking to constituents across the city is something I've heard over and over again, how they don't feel like the policies that are being implemented are really in their best interest. They're kind of either being driven by developers or advocacy groups. And so we're kind of forgetting about the actual residents, and they're the ones feeling the most impact. So hoping to kind of bring some accountability back and really tie that back to what matters most for residents.
Okay, can you expand a little bit about how would you bring accountability? Do you have specific ideas or plans for how to bring accountability to the council?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that we do a lot of internal reporting on outcomes and kind of what, as far as the measurement of goals for uh, our I think what is it, the 2030 plan is the most recent one, but it doesn't really tie back to kind of what that means for residents. It's very kind of internal operations focused. And I think moving that back and kind of being more resident focused about what does this mean for Cambridge as a whole rather than kind of internal operations. And also kind of constantly reassessing, are we trending towards our goal? So if we're working towards vision zero, like what does that mean? What does success mean? Are we moving towards success? Are we not? If we're not, are we doing things to kind of reorient instead of we put in a policy, we wait 3 years to evaluate it, but by that time, like it's already there are the effects have already kind of had a lasting impact where we're not necessarily good at making more rapid iteration. So that's what I would like to see us be a little bit more flexible and kind of saying, hey, did this work? Did this not work? And if it didn't, being able to kind of make adjustments and pivot. And I think for the council, what that means is really asking good questions also of city departments and city staff when they're going into their kind of weekly updates or updates around specific policy issues, diving deeper into kind of like when we're getting data points, like where is that data coming from? What is kind of the sources, the accuracy of that data? Right now, it's kind of like very checkboxy of like, yep, we did our update. This looks great. This looks great. We're not necessarily asking the hard probing questions. So I would like to see a little bit more of that from council as a whole, as far as kind of diving deeper into some of the details.
Okay. Let's put a pin in that for now because I'm interested on when we get talk about specific issues, maybe you can give me an example of that, of what you're talking about. And
Yeah.
but let's start with we'll hit like some of the hot button issues. Like first, so you said do you work in Kendall Square?
hmm
And
Yeah. So we have an office at CI. We have a couple desks. I mean, office. Like we have a couple desks at CIC. And then the most recent business is actually a veterinary business. So we just opened a 5,000 square foot clinic over on Beacon, right on the, like, it's technically Somerville, but it's right over the line.
yeah, and how do you commute? And or do you,
Yes. So normally I depends on where I'm going. So if I'm going to clinic, I usually drive. If I'm going to Kendall, I'll usually Uber, walk. Sometimes I bike. I haven't been biking as much recently. But whatever is kind of going to get me there. Like if I have more time, I'll walk. But if I kind of am running late for a meeting, I'll usually Uber just because I'm not parking anywhere near Kendall Square because it's a huge pain.
yeah, so is there anything that when you're on your commute, is there anything you see that you would change to make that commute easier or safer?
It's a pretty short commute. I think for me, like I would love to be able to utilize the Easy Ride bus, but it actually doesn't stop at that end of Kendall Square. It like kind of goes off on Binney and then goes up to the other side of Kendall Square. So I would have loved to have that as an option, but it's not actually that convenient for like where I'm trying to go. So like walking to the bus versus like walking just straight to Kendall Square. It's like the same amount of time as if I were to take the bus and then walk, just because it's like more. I live on like the upper edge of Cambridge Crossing right next to the Leechmere, and the bus stop is a little bit farther down.
Yeah,
So it's like 5-10 minute walk depending on it. But it really depends on like how close I'm cutting it for my meetings
yeah,
is a big factor.
yeah. I know that they're talking about improving the Easy Ride or expanding it, but I don't know where that is right now.
Yeah, I think they like definitely they changed the route. So I think there is a new stop that's like on the other side of the Leechmere station, which is definitely closer, but it's still, like I said, it drops off at kind of like really it's more convenient if you're like up towards Technology Square
Mhm.
by like Area 4 than if you're at like the CIC.
Yeah. Do you support the cycling safety ordinance as it's written and completing the bike lane network? And yeah, let's start there.
Yeah, so I feel like the bike lane network, so I definitely am in support of Vision Zero, but I don't necessarily think that miles of bike lanes is a good metric. And so again, this is where like coming back to talking about metrics of success, like Vision Zero is zero fatalities. Where in even the data put out by the Bicycle Safety Commission is that 40% of fatalities happen mid-route. So that's where that would be affected by bike lanes, but 60% happen in intersections. So what I would really like to see is more emphasis being put on intersection design because that's where we are still seeing fatalities rather than just like miles of bike lane being a metric because that really is only addressing 40% of the problem. And depending on when we're seeing hot spots, and there might be specific routes that are more dangerous than others, where so like miles is easy to measure, but it's not necessarily a true measurement of success. And so as far as like moving towards vision zero. So that's where kind of what we put in, it's kind of, I want to say like it's a little bit half-assed.
Okay. And so are there bike lanes that are you saying we should stop the CSO or take bike lanes out
I
or
think I would like to see like more data around like where are we seeing like where like more prioritization of those bike lanes. I think it's like, all right, we put in this many miles versus like this specific stretch had this number of fatalities or this is considered a higher risk
Mhm.
versus other stretches where it's more of like a convenience factor because that's where I think we're getting into when like we've hit a lot of the major routes like Cambridge Street, Hampshire. And so when we start to get to kind of some of these like other routes, like is it like are we really bringing value for kind of the money that's being spent there
Mhm.
versus kind of the impact that we're getting in relation to safety?
Okay. Um, and can you, I guess, can you, I'm a little confused about what will we study? The safety impacts of the bike lanes that are already there? Is that what you're talking about looking at?
Yeah, so like are we hitting like are we implemented the bike lanes in the most risky areas?
Hmm.
And so like if that and like and I would rather if we have rather than saying like okay, we need to complete out the network because like we have hit a lot of the major routes.
Hmm.
I would like to see the focus shift to how do we make better intersection design and maybe potentially like again more like if we're going to be going into a period where we have finite resources from a budget standpoint of kind of slowing down some of and like reevaluating where we're looking at the rest of the network versus putting that time and money towards intersections.
Okay. Okay. Let's talk about housing a little bit. Um, So everyone knows housing is a huge issue in Cambridge.
Yeah.
It seems like you can't, and no one can afford to live here unless you're wealthy or lucky enough to find a cheap rent. And the council has been trying to address that, as they say, by passing a number of measures. They've done the citywide upzoning, they've done the affordable housing overlay and removed parking minimums and allowed ADUs, among other actions. Do you approve of these changes? And what else would you like to see done to our housing law, if anything?
Yeah, so as the law is written, I do not because I actually think it was inadequate, especially compared to some of the policies it was based on. Like if you look at Minneapolis and New York, they actually had much more robust guidelines for design review. They actually did not take away parking minimums completely. It was based on transit access. So I would have liked to have seen more of that being put into the policy rather than kind of a blanket like anything goes and relying on market forces, which like is it's a choice.
Mhm.
And like there is benefit in removing roadblocks to kind of not let process get in the way of progress, but it's highly reliant on kind of the market um, balancing that. And so I just for the city like don't necessarily trust the market that much and so would like to see more of those kind of guardrails put into place like setbacks to protect solar and green space again putting in design review and more just to make sure that like I mean, I've ran projects from conception through construction and worked with architects, worked with general contractors. You really have to have somebody every step of the way saying like, hey, like that doesn't make sense. Like this is what the goal is. So if we're putting up an affordable housing, um, like I said, I went to the 2027 Mass Ave meeting. There was only two elevators in there. And like as somebody that lives in a 12-story building, I can tell you that like at least two of those elevators are always broken. Like there's always something going on. Either somebody's moving, elevator's broken. So for a building of that size, and like one of them, they aren't even freight elevators. And looking at like how people would like move in, the logistics, I was like, it's going to be a hard building to move into. There's no backdoor entrance and there's no freight. So, like those types of things that, like, when you get into like who is going to be living here, what does the neighborhood look like? Like, somebody that's kind of is a little bit removed from the process and can ask those questions is really important to make sure that on the like finished end that you're getting a product, which in this case is the building that is meeting the intentions of the original design, which is to build a livable place, an affordable place for people in Cambridge. So I think that is, in my view, what design review is supposed to do is kind of be that checkpoint to say, like, hey, does this make sense? And it's like the architects are going to have their own vision and the investors, and kind of then it gets down to like, is this actually buildable from a construction standpoint?
Mhm.
So yeah, having that kind of that one check to a point to be like, let's look at this very, very objectively, I think is something that is sorely missing from the current upzoning laws.
Okay. Um, so it sounds like you don't necessarily disagree with the goal of more housing.
No, I mean, like I'm a renter, like would I love cheaper rent? Like absolutely. But I think it's how do you do it sustainably? And also, again, I live in one of these giant buildings.
Yeah.
There's a lot of issues with like longevity as far as like my building's 10 years old. I was talking to our building manager and he's like, I can't even get cabinets to replace the ones that you have. Like they don't make them anymore.
Mhm.
And so that's where, like, looking down the line, are we looking at the longevity of these buildings? And especially when you're building for investment versus then like somebody's home, you make very different choices from a design and like an architecture, like material standpoint.
Okay, well, so it sounds like you're saying some of these places, like maybe the building on Mass Ave, 2027 Mass Ave, is built more for investment than
Yeah, so when you have like the theory is with upzoning, you'll have more at market units come in, the older units will depreciate, which become your middle rate housing, and then you also have affordable units that are being met. That
right.
only works if the upper rate units are of good enough quality to last to become middle rate units.
Okay.
So they have to be like, that's where a lot of older buildings do better because the construction quality, just from the quality of materials that we had in timber and brick, was better.
Mhm.
Even, I mean, 20 years ago was like, still wasn't that great, but like 30, 40 years ago was still okay. The stuff that's being built today, again, it's like they're actually a lot of times expecting the building to depreciate over 10 years so that they can knock it down and build up something new. Because everybody wants something that's brand new. So it's just the quality of build today is different than it was like when you're looking at, like, I would rather see retrofitted buildings are probably going to be of better construction quality than any new builds technically today.
Um, so is there something in the regulations you could imagine that would address your concerns about the quality of build and the longevity of the what's being built?
Yeah, I think again, that's where design review comes in to ask those questions. So like if we're using um like mass timber, like just kind of probing on like again asking that question of like what is the longevity of this building and kind of not like requiring those types of answers so that it's not just like, again, investors might just be like, this is cheaper. I'm going to do this because it's going to return, it's going to be a better investment on my end. But again, is that really serving the purpose of like building more housing? And so being able to have that checkpoint of somebody to kind of broach that.
So you think I don't want to put words in your mouth here, but it sounds like you think that the minimum building standards for housing in the state that the Cambridge has to follow is not sufficient for what we're trying to do as far as building more housing.
Yeah, if left to kind of market forces, the market is going to do what is best for the market, not necessarily what is best for people.
Right. I'm just because I'm an engineer and I know that I have to
Oh, yeah.
minimum standards, and the idea is those standards, especially in the state of Massachusetts, is like safe. And but yeah, that's not always the case. I mean, look at the building on Memorial Drive that they're having,
Yeah, Memorial Drive is like a great example too.
but
And I
that
think
didn't
we'll
meet the
see,
standards.
yeah, so that's where like the minimum standards are the minimum for a reason. And like I've even seen like luxury builds where I'm like,
Sure.
oh, some of the choices that were made, I was like, were pretty questionable as far as like you could tell at their quick flips they did, where they made it from a one family into a two family. And that's one thing too. I would really like to see Cambridge prioritize bigger units for families, especially in affordable housing, because I think that's what is still going to be sorely missing, even with the upzoning, because it's much more cost effective and a bigger return on investment to do studios and one bedrooms, but that doesn't help keep families in Cambridge. And that's something that like I'm struggling with right now
Mm.
is like even looking for any like a three bedroom that like plus an office, there's like nothing. Like even with like a really high budget, you have very limited options for rental and the interest rates, it doesn't make sense to buy right now.
Yeah. Can I ask you, do you have a hard out? Do you have to go at a certain time, or
No.
I just don't? Yeah. Um, okay. Well, I think let me ask this question. I sent this to you. Yeah, on your website. Let's see if we've covered it already. You say you'll fight for planning that starts with early disclosure and build space for representative input, not just rush hearings or checkbox consultation. Um, do you think? So it sounds like some examples of that you think are in the upzoning that just passed. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think the upzoning and like what happened on Garden Street with the bike lanes, like there's a lot of instances specifically lately where kind of plans were either presented already baked to residents or we didn't see kind of concrete um, kind of examples where feedback was incorporated. And then you had responses from council that was like, well, we asked you and you didn't, that's what you wanted. And it's like, that's not acceptable. Like, it's, and like having done a lot of like user research. So, like, I'm had a product and operations. So, having done kind of user interviews, and usually I'm working with clinicians who are very difficult to understand, like, what actually they're trying to get at. You can ask leading questions. You can get very skewed data depending on your sample size and kind of the way that it was conducted.
Mhm.
And so this kind of like we had a public meeting, we asked for comment, and that was enough. Like there are examples again in other cities that have done more thorough kind of processes, and it takes more work. It's more effort, it takes longer, but the goal is if you put that effort in up front, you'll at the end, you won't have as much backlash. You'll be able to get the community bought in along the way. And that buy-in is also really important. So it's like kind of the angle, you might not get anything new, but getting your community champions, getting people on board and helping kind of socialize them to the issue before you make the change is going to help it be a more successful change on the end. And that's something that I think I'm hoping to bring through my work where I've had to do a lot of behavior change. Like I've led teams through um, mergers and acquisitions, new builds, and like it is a lot of process of like this is really uncomfortable, this is new, but how do you kind of bring them along so at the end they're actually advocating for the change instead of resisting against it. And so I think that there's a lot of nuance in that.
Mhm.
And again, the city's kind of trying to get things done really efficiently, but we lose the efficacy of it. And that's something I've had to learn the hard way throughout my career. And so I'm hoping to bring kind of, again, that perspective as well to the council of how do you balance those two things? Because you can sway either direction where you get kind of too much talking, too many cooks in the kitchen. You don't necessarily make concrete action, but on the other end, you can kind of get too efficient in that you're losing some of that efficacy. And that's when you end up, again, with a process like Garden Street, where we end up spending more money to redo what we already did. And so, how do we avoid making those kind of mistakes?
Do you think, and I ask you this because I've covered, especially like the upzoning conversation, which has gone on for years.
Yeah.
Um, do you think, aren't there some issues where they're just going to be controversial, and you can do all the research and all the design studies that you want, but there's just going to be a hard group that's going to be for it and a group that's going to be against it, and sometimes you just have to make a decision. Do you think we've gotten there on any, or do you on any of these issues that have passed recently? Are you?
I think what I've seen is that it's more about people not feeling heard
Mhm.
rather than kind of hard decisions and like people getting put into these groups of like, oh, you're a NIMBY, you're pro upzoning. And when you talk to people, like there is a lot more, they have a lot more in common than they have in the differences. So like everybody that I've talked to agrees that we need more affordable housing and that rents are too high and like but it's the way kind of the way it's being done. And I think there are like concerns that a lot of the neighborhoods and older residents have that like are valid. Are some of them sometimes like again, I'm also coming from the perspective of like this conversations in the suburbs are like way more like out of control.
Yeah.
So I'm like, it's not where at least we agree on some things where it's like, why, like, how do we come to shared understanding of goals and so that people are feeling heard? And I think that people feeling heard is it's again it's more psychological than it is about kind of like factual of things you're like being right or wrong and that and so how do we bring people along in the journey so that they feel a part of it and don't feel people don't like to feel like things are being forced upon them that are going to create changes in their lives. So and I think that's a communication issue. It's like an organizational alignment issue. And again, these are things that I deal with on a daily basis. So they're very familiar to me of like there's methods you can do to mitigate these things, but we just aren't, the city's just kind of like, this is it. If you don't like it, well, it sucks for you. And that's, I think, not fair and what's causing a lot of resentment within the community on both sides of issues. Like it's not just one side or the other. Um, and that's where you kind of have these echo chambers where I've seen it when you go into like city council meetings and public comment happens. And then
Mhm.
it's like the city councilors are like, oh, time for real business. And they kind of ignore everything that just happened and kind of move on with instead of like acknowledging and I think talking to people and saying like, hey, like your feelings are valid,
Mhm.
but this is why we're going to make this decision. And these are the other things that like are influencing that and explaining that there's things that like counselors might know that the public doesn't. And
Mhm.
so doing a better job of explaining how they came to the decisions, acknowledging concerns.
Mm,
I've seen it in my work, like the customer, they're not wrong, but they're not always right. So like what they might think is the solution isn't actually sometimes the best solution, but they're they're doing that because trying to describe a problem. And so that problem is real for them. So if you kind of dig a layer deeper and say like how do we focus on the problem, and
mhm.
then we can go into kind of what a solution looks like once we agree what the problem is. And again, that's something like I had when my vet text be like, I want this button. I'm like, okay, like, but why? Like, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to achieve because you want that button? And it turned out it's a totally different problem. That like the button's just like the answer that they could think of
Mhm.
in their mind. So like that's the kind of perspective I bring into it is like let's take a step back and like when they're saying this is the solution that I want, what is the underlying problem that they're trying to address with that?
Okay, great. All right, well, I think we've got
Sorry, that was a very like long,
no,
convoluted answer.
no. I appreciate it, and that those are very good answers. I just want to let's move on. I live in Central Square.
Oh, yes.
I hear, I mean, I hear a lot of complaints about the unhoused. They're very
Yes.
visible. Um, is there anything that you would do to address the issue of people living rough on the street, needles in the street, things like that?
This is so it's an issue very near and dear to my heart because I have taken care of a lot of unhoused and people that are suffering from substance abuse over the years. And so one of the things that I did was really wanted to understand on the ground like what is happening and kind of before kind of being like this is my opinion. So I actually went out with the care team, who is the behavioral health response team for the city,
Mhm.
which was really wonderful to see kind of the work that they're doing and really understand the scope of the issue within Cambridge. And I found out a lot of things that I didn't know just from kind of, again, I've heard a lot about kind of specifically the issues with Central Square. From my perspective, one of the first things I would really love to do if I were elected, would be to put together a special task force between CARE, the police department, fire, and CHA to try to tackle this issue because it's very complex. It's a very big systems issue. Not one thing is going to be able to solve it. Like they already are doing. They have a contractor that comes in and I think gives 25 cents per needle for for people to drop off needles. Within 2 hours, they've cleaned up 600 more. Like it's this tidal wave issue. And so, like, how do we really start at the root? How do we look at potentially? I would like to see a decentralization of services. I think that's what really causes when you have these large congregations of people in Central Square. I also used to live next to Mass and Cass, so like very aware of the situation down there. And the reason that people congregate there is because there is a high number of shelters. A Mass and Cass, it's because of the methadone clinic.
Mhm.
So you end up having people traveling in and then they kind of hang out there because they don't have anywhere else to go. And
Mhm.
so how do we do um, like more disbursement? Like there is a large unhoused population living up by Alewife. Like how do we bring more services up there so that again, we're not kind of concentrating people in one place in order to get those services. And I think that's where you see the biggest effect on the community. And so I would really like to see better utilization of mobile types of resources where we can go be out in the community, safe injection sites.
Mhm.
Um, it- Addiction really is a disease, and even with people want to get help, like the drive, I've seen people sitting in waiting rooms trying to get treatment, and they cannot physically be there because the drive to use that substance is so high. And so, like, we really shouldn't be condemning people to be like, oh, you should just die
Mhm.
because it's such a strong physical chemical reaction. So I think that would also go a long way to help like prevent sight to ground. I think that's what they call it as far as needles. And that would do go a long way in protecting kind of like I said, I mean, I have personally not here, but in on Mass Ave, stepped on a needle from the street. So
Great.
it's like, yeah, it's a huge, yeah. So like, how do we keep our streets safe? How do we keep our community safe while providing those kind of resources again to really address the problem at the root? And I think, like I said, the city it's just so siloed right now. The departments don't really talk to each other a lot when they could be doing a lot of coordination. But the unfortunate truth is, like, some people actually feel safer being outside. They have more control. They've either had really bad experiences with shelters. Um, they don't there's been a lot of mistrust with the system. They've been kind of in situations where they feel like they have more control because even if they're unhoused, they're still people and they still have choices. And I think that's the biggest thing, is like remembering that these are people, and they have the right to their own choices.
And you support safe injection sites, is that what I heard?
Yeah, I do. I think um, it's it's so hard because it's like, do you want to be enabling and all of that? But I've also again seen when people drop their friend off at the emergency room
Hmm.
and on the back door, and they are about 2 minutes from not being alive. So it's like how do you balance that? And there really isn't a perfect solution, or else we would have solved this issue with the number of deaths.
Sure.
So having Narcan available, and again, it's like just because it's again the physical reaction is so strong that they really you can't help it sometimes.
Okay, let's shift gears again. In the current environment, the economy is likely to crash. Commercial revenues are going to decrease in the city. I think we're seeing that already.
Yep.
How do you think the council should respond to their budget priorities? Would you support raising taxes if necessary, or do you think the council should just cut the budget in line with the revenues that we currently are collecting?
So even if we were to raise taxes, it still won't be enough without an override. And the potential impact of increasing taxes might actually be more harmful to the city, as far as kind of livability and from a commercial tax burden on the businesses that are already facing kind of tight constraints themselves. So I think that rather than kind of being like, oh, we can just pretend to go on as business as usual and find money from somewhere else, really saying, hey, like we're going to have to make some hard choices. Um, and again, I think when you talk about austerity, it's really in kind of cutting, nobody wants to cut programs. Like nobody wants to be the one that says, hey, we're not doing this year. And
Right.
again, that's where I'd really like to see a comprehensive review of like what are things that are working. So like what are things that we actually probably should be shifting more budget over to, and what are things that like are not meeting the objectives and that we could be cutting. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I think that it actually, like, even in the private sector, like constraints are what actually makes you think more creatively. And I think we are a city full of extremely intelligent people. So I think like abundance actually creates less efficient systems. When you have a little bit of when you have more constraints, you're actually building a better process overall. And so how do we think about longevity, sustainability, rather than kind of making a really big splashy headline or saying we want to provide all of these programs, which are fantastic. But is it really, again, stuff that is necessary? And I think that's another kind of feeling that I've heard from a lot of residents is they feel like the city has been really kind of disrespectful with their tax money and being like, we're paying for all these programs, but how is it benefiting me? Is it really something that I can utilize that I'm paying for?
Mhm.
Um, and so, how do we kind of be a little bit more conscientious and say, is this going to be something that again, is where we can see very clear outcomes, and it's something that is benefiting residents rather than being like, we're the best at X, or we did this awesome new program that we're the first at. And like, there's a lot of things that, like, I think that we like to overachieve on as a city. And so, kind of being like, we don't necessarily have to be the best at everything.
It sounds like you have a,
But
it
we,
sounds like you have a specific program in mind, or when you said when,
um,
yeah, can you,
no, I think like for that, it's really like, again, it's the whole thing with upzoning. Like, we're the most aggressive. We have the best bike lanes. We have the best this. And it's like, we don't need to do that. Like, we don't, I think we tend to go to extremes with that. And again, like the times have changed. And I've seen this on the business side as well. Like, you see a lot of companies that were built in the 20, I would say the 2018 to pre-COVID era that were just like throwing money at things. And now they're making a lot of cuts, and that's why we're seeing kind of the economic windfall change because investors are like, nope, like we're clawing that back. Like, you're not going to be spending X amount of money on kind of these frivolous things just to grow. You're seeing a shift towards how do you be much more sustainable? How do you be much more kind of thoughtful in your planning? And I think that's something that we're now seeing that effect on in the city planning as well, and that we're having to readjust to that new era. But personally, having gone through that, made a lot better decisions, and like my personal business is a much stronger business because we didn't have that free cash that some other businesses that were built before. And so I think we'll probably go through a similar process with the city where, like, yes, are we having to kind of tighten up, but it's going to force us to be more critical of how we're spending, and hopefully that will help us make better choices that down the line. Yeah, the shelter was a great example, like where it was a great program. It's something that was really had great outcomes, but we were relying on finite funds. And when that was up, it was like, oh, we can't do this anymore. So it's much harder to pull back those programs
the
rather than being
transitional
like,
wellness
yeah,
center? Is that what you're talking
yeah,
about? Okay, yeah,
yeah. So that's where, like, how do we make, like, taking away those things is much, much harder
yeah.
than just being like, hey, this is where we're at. We're gonna stay here, and it's gonna be less risk taking. But we're gonna be much more consistent in the long run, and that we plan to offer these programs for we know we'll be able to afford them
Okay,
for a much longer time.
okay. Um, let's go back to kind of a more holistic view of Cambridge. What would you do to improve the quality of life in artistic life and encourage culture in this city? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think Cambridge actually does a really great job. There's always like a festival going on. There's like something, um, some sort of community event or neighborhood event or arts fair. And I think for me, like, again, personally, I would like to see more activities geared towards like later school age children. And this is purely selfish because I have a 10-year-old that I'm always looking for kind of new activities. And I find there's stuff for like little kids and there's stuff for teenagers, but there's not a lot for kind of your older school age kids. That's a community event, and we try to go to as much stuff as we can, but it's mostly like beer gardens,
Yeah.
like, or stuff for like reading in the park and stuff for like little kids.
Mhm.
So I think that like families are kind of a forgotten segment of Cambridge, and that like we do still live here.
Yeah.
And kind of when you're raising children, like what are those needs? And so I would like to see more kind of activities and Even like cooking classes for elementary school kids. I'm shocked there's like none. It's driving me bonkers. I have a like I said, my stepdaughter loves to bake, and I'm like, there's stuff for adults, but there isn't like there might be some through the school, but like there's no after school or weekend program for like learning how to bake.
Yeah, that's a good thought. Have you gone to like Inman Square Halloween?
Oh, yes, I was at. So the one benefit for Tandem is I have been to almost every single festival handing out whipped cream and dog treats. So we were there last year and I had grossly underestimated the amount of candy I was going to need. So I had to
Yeah,
make like four runs to the Walgreens to like keep refilling because the kids were like they were just grabbing
ravenous.
handfuls. Yeah. But
Along the same lines, what do you think have a plan, or do you think there's a way to address like the vacant storefronts in the squares? Especially in Central, but there's some in Inman and Harvard Square too.
Yeah, and again, that's a really hard one because technically can't do an or a vacancy tax, which would be the like most obvious thing to do. So really the only way would be to provide some sort of like absurd incentivization to landlords where it's like you have to make it stupid for them to keep them vacant because what happens is depending on their portfolio sometimes like they'll sit around and they'll wait for like the perfect tenant. And so we actually were trying to bid for a spot at the 95 First Street, which is now a Taco Bell. Fun fact. So we were trying to put a clinic there, but the land, like, it's just landlords have so much power, especially with small businesses where you don't necessarily have the cash reserves. Like, they really want like a bank, a national chain to come in that has good reserves. They can put, they have good traction. So if you're a small business, that's the hardest thing. And so I don't know quite what's like realistic yet. And I know like they've been trying the theater in Harvard Square, like even just getting people, sometimes these landlords to show up to a meeting is difficult,
Yeah.
and even that. So I need to do more research, but until that power dynamic changes, it's going to be really difficult to change because there just is no incentive for them to um to fill that storefront. It's economically better for them to wait. And one of the biggest things that people don't talk about is every year that that storefront is vacant, that building deteriorates. So
Yeah.
like we took a space that was vacant, I think for almost 6 years. We've had to do a ton of work in kind of like rehabbing the building. And again, if you're a small business, like you might not have those funds. A lot of businesses, again, sometimes they might get an SBA, but a lot of times they don't, and they don't want to have that debt. So yeah, you're forced to make some really hard choices, but yeah, there's not the landlords have a lot of power um right now.
Yeah. If you were on the council this past session, who would you have voted for mayor?
I feel like that's actually a really hard question. um I don't know. I think Denise has done a good job, especially kind of being very um like even keeled through a lot of the changes. So I do think that she was a good choice for
Mhm.
that for mayor this time. Just again with a lot of controversial votes coming up. So I don't think that that was a bad decision on part of the council.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to discuss that we haven't covered? Anything you'd like to say?
Um, no, vote for me.
All right. That's that's good enough. Well, thank you, Elizabeth Bisio, for coming on, and good luck during your campaign.
Thank you so much.
Great.